Welcome to the Coming Clean podcast with your host, Peter O. Estevez.
Hit a dash in my position, you will never last. Real talk, I had to get it from the mall. Real talk, now I'm vibing with a bankroll. Cash.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Coming Clean podcast. Today we have an incredible guest, a woman that has traveled all over the world, a woman that I have a lot of respect and admiration for, because at a very young age, she has done things that most people only aspire or dream about doing. Today, we have Virginia Salas-Kastilio. Hello, Virginia, and welcome to Coming Clean Podcast.
Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited to have you, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you. You know, I have followed your trajectory for quite a while, and it really amazes me how gutsy you are, how driven you are, how motivated you are, how much you challenge yourself and you challenge others to go out and explore the world, explore themselves, and explore service, which is really something that I really care about. You know, I've seen you on the front lines, fighting the Amazon fires. I've seen you in the front lines at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and that really impresses me because obviously I'm probably twice, maybe three times your age, but I remember very young, only aspiring to be there. Okay, at your age, and you're already doing it. And for me, it came very much later in life, but I love and admire that drive, that motivation, and everything that is behind you. Thank you so much for your courage.
Thank you so much for that acknowledgement. I really appreciate it.
Virginia is a serial entrepreneur who was named one of Inc. magazine's top 26 women of change of the world. She is internationally acclaimed speaker and activist and the founder of most well-known brands, Humans Trust Logistics and Humans I Trust, and I Trust University, helping much needed medical equipment in the front lines of revolutionist education, wisdom for futuristic thinking. Her purpose is to recognize humanity and regenerate our earth. Thank you, Virginia. So tell us a little bit more about your purpose and what exactly Humans I Trust and Humans I Trust University do.
Yeah. I'm just very, very passionate about human connection. And I think it comes from being very disconnected for a lot of my life. Especially as a teenager, I was bullied a lot. And I traveled the world. I went to 15 different schools across 3 different languages. So I was always kind of the new girl. And, coming into different schools where, friend circles and groups have already been formed, and then you're kind of like coming in. I was just bullied a lot and kind of like pushed out. And so coming from that space, I always knew what it felt like not to fit in and not to be connected to other people. And in the moments where I was connected and I did have friends and I did have a circle of support, it felt to me like that was such a true purpose for us as human beings. And after 5 years in corporate career in IT, I was working for Apple for 3 years and then for Oracle, another IT company. And I instead of kind of starting my business immediately and selling things, I traveled the world for a year as a happiness researcher. So I interviewed everyone from homeless people to billionaires on what it meant for them to be happy. And the one thread that I saw in all of that is human connection and is gratitude. Truly feeling grateful for all of the things that I do have in my life and being seen and met and heard by other people around me. This is really what leads to fulfillment. And throughout my travels, I saw, especially in big cities, and now we're seeing it more than ever with what's kind of happening in the world, is us feeling so separate from other humans around us. And this, this idea of maybe being judged, being, who's ever had that experience of like walking down the street by themselves and seeing this group of people and being like, oh, like, are they going to judge me? Like, what am I wearing? Are they going to laugh at, or it's like this instinctual kind of fear that's, or not even instinctual, I would say it's more conditioned. It's a conditioned fear that we've now adapted of other people, of being judged. And when all that we really crave is true connection, is deeper connection. And so that's why, you know, I created communities like Humans I Trust, which is, you know, change maker entrepreneurs and activists and you know, conscious leaders coming together and dropping into deep connection with each other in masterminds and events and, you know, Zoom calls and just gatherings all around the world, and seeing how can we support each other, and with doing that, how can we support the world.
And you know, to your point of connecting with each other, we're living in a very volatile time. There is an uprising humanity wanting to be heard and seen, particularly from the African American community. You know, and I think this is something that is not the only community that has been affected by wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard. I think this is all over the world with minorities overall. But the recent events that took place in the United States with the egregious murder of George Floyd has brought this to the front line. How do we begin a process of healing and really doing the work, not talking about it, not trying to be politically correct, not allowing this to let time pass by and we forget about it and we resume to our old ways? In your opinion, what is it that we need to do forward as a community, not dependent on governments, not dependent on institutions, but us individually, to move forward and really take advantage of the change that the universe has given us an opportunity to undertake?
Yeah, I really love this question, Peter. And I really think, you know, the opportunity here of the way that we can show up, and, you know, you just said it very beautifully where you said, you know, let's not just talk, right? Let's not just talk about change. And I think that the first thing that needs to happen here is to truly listen, is to deeply listen. And as you were saying also very perfectly, it's about being seen, being heard, being acknowledged. And it's not even so much, oh, I want to be, you know, acknowledged as a minority or whatever. That's exactly what we're stepping away from. I want to be acknowledged as a human being of this earth, right? Of all of us together, having the same value, having the same voice, and that our voices shall be heard. So for me, you know, it's not so much of a question of race, and it's not kind of coming from a space of white privilege or saying, oh, you know, this isn't a racial conversation, because, like, yes, it absolutely is, and I do understand that it was the catalyst, but there's a bigger conversation that actually can be opened, is a oneness, is a wholeness of humanity. And I think that's what we're fighting for, is truly saying is that we need to sit down together and figure out our human rights, and figure out us as a humanity, what we are representing as values, what are our beliefs. And so here in the UK, actually, statues are being taken down that are connecting, you know, to slave traders or leaders that were slave keepers or whatever. I mean, that is actually, like, someone might look at that and say, well, that's kind of stupid. Why are we taking down statues? Actually, it's a very important act, because it's saying we are being so unshakable in our integrity of what we are representing as a country, that we are not going to have these big godlike statues of people that are in a misalignment with our value system. And it is actually a really big thing of the governments to step up and do it. Instead, let's put other figures up there. Let's put other people up there in history that have been fighting for the value system that we today in 2020 and in the future want to be representing. And so I think what needs to happen is, you know, as kind of crazy as it may seem, but this is, you know, and it could be in different pockets around the world, but I think that, and I've had this idea for a while, that the world needs to get on a phone call. Like, the world needs to get on a Zoom call, like all of us together. And there's going to be different people. It's kind of like a big UN meeting, you know, where we share our stories, where there's not facts and figures and statistics and reasons and how many white people are getting murdered and how many Black people are getting murdered, how many Hispanic people. It doesn't matter what, you know, what those statistics are, because it's about what is under those statistics of the stories of being witnessed, right? A murderer isn't like going off, you know, a fact sheet of some numbers and is looking at an article and saying, hey, you know what? It feels like the population is getting pretty thick right now in this area. Let me, you know, act now and murder this, you know, these people so that it can be balanced out. It's not like that. It's coming from a deep rooted pain, something that's happened in their past, something, you know, that they've experienced in their life, other injustice. The injustice is just keeps on getting passed on from person to person to person. And I really love that quote of like, hurt people hurt people. And so all we're continuing to do is just hurting people with more pain. And that's what the real coronavirus is. That's what the real, you know, poison is, and everything is that big fear. And while we're distracted with the fear, it makes us forget about the actual antidote, right? Which is love, which is healing, which is boosting your immune system, which is eating healthy, which is, you know, truly eating like fruits and vegetables and things that are going to nourish you. And so, and it's the same thing with our minds. It's the same thing with positivity, human connection, prayer, gratitude, service, right? And so in this phone call of the earth, I believe that we need to all get on, as many people as possible, 1 billion people, for example, and there's going to be some people that speak and share their stories and share their pain and get witnessed by what has happened to them, right? Any moments of violence and injustice in their life. And it's not about judging. It's not about saying this person did this on to me. It's just about saying, this was the pain that I experienced in my life. This was the sexual molestation. This was the murder that I witnessed. This is whatever. And the world witnessing that pain, holding that pain and truly understanding it and not judging it, not trying to control it, not trying to push it away or coddle it, but witnessing, becoming sober to what we are doing to each other and to our earth. And that's when we can have an up-leveling. Right. And so, and these dialogues and these conversations, they can happen in circles and communities. And this is kind of the work that we do, is we all get together at Humans I Trust, everyone's sitting in a big circle. And, you know, and this is very, I would say, you know, very native as well. Like if you think about the Amazon jungles, you know, you were mentioning, this is how tribes gather and work something out in the tribe of truly listening. And if there's a problem in a tribe, they will sit in council for days until it is alchemized, until it is done. And so, you know, in our meetings, everyone gets to have a voice and everyone gets to say something. It'll be more difficult with 1 billion people, but there can be some people selected, and it doesn't mean they're not going to be selected by their status or how rich they are or what their race is. None of that. It's just for them representing and being and a representation of humanity in their story. And I think that is what's going to create massive change.
Wow. Wow. Powerful statement. Couple of things that I want to touch on right quick. You know, there's a big difference, and I think there's a misconception of what people understand that the human race wants. Okay. And one of it is equality and being the same. We are not all equal, but we are all the same. Okay. And there's a big separation. There's a big gap. There's a big bridge in understanding that. I understand that we are, I'm not equal to you. You're not equal to me. I'm not equal to Steve Jobs or whatever, you know, in knowledge and wisdom, in education, whatever you want to call it. But we are all equal. We're all created by the same powerful source. Call it whatever you want to be. Okay. It is our birthright to be treated like humans just based on those bases. And I think what people misunderstand, and only because institutions have created this perception that, okay, so there's the minorities there. So we became labels and we became statistics to be able to pacify and to be able to manipulate resources across the world. Okay. I understand that, but that no longer works. That no longer works. All people want, of all of us, what we all want is to be treated like a human being. with love and respect and to be acknowledged. I think that one of the reasons that we have this uprising is that as the coronavirus came about and people are at home in peace and we have a sense of attention, we are quiet, we are present, we are here, we are connected to the earth, we are connected to the universe, and we really begin to understand when we come to peace all together as a collective, we really begin to understand what injustices are. And we realize that we need, as a collective, to move forward, to raise our voice and to say, enough is enough. We cannot tolerate it. We are not distracted by Netflix. We are not distracted by our cell phones. We are not distracted by our jobs. The universe has made us pause and listen and bring together collectively our energy and do something to change. To your point of the statues, I completely understand and I agree with the fact that certain statues should be removed. And you know, and it was something that I wrestled with. And as a matter of fact, very early on, I had a conversation with my son about it, and he asked me what I thought about it. And at the time, because I didn't have an opinion that even pacified me, that made me good about myself, I told my son, I said, I need to think about it. I don't know what to think of it. But as you mention it right now, we cannot align ourselves. We either align or we're not aligned. Okay, we can choose what we want, right? We have to be all in order for us to truly have change, evolution, growth. That is the only way that this can work. We can't do half measures. Half measures avail us nothing. If we are fully in, then we're committed to change and transformation. And you're right, and everything changes, even history changes. So maybe it's time to have different statues. Maybe it's time to acknowledge different people. Maybe it's time to acknowledge different history and their contributions, right? So there's nothing wrong with that change. And I think what we ought to do in a time like this is to be able to change our pain into inspiration. Not to war, not to messiness, not to dirtiness, but to use this pain into inspiration. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I just saw people going out of the streets and drawing big murals and you know, getting creative and actually going into their zones of genius, you know, and I think that is very true. Like, I think that, you know, we're not going to fight violence with violence. And what people are saying is, you know, like, these protests that are going on are going to be able to change legislations. And I absolutely believe that we have the power to do that. And I think that having people march on the street, and what I'm seeing, these peaceful, like, silent protests of people just really just like raising their arms and just like being like, we are here. That's so beautiful to me. Like, that's amazing. So powerful. And just really of standing together as humanity. And it's interesting because I actually, my background studies are sociology, because I wanted to understand human beings and how we relate to each other and how we act. And so in sociology, we're always learning how one of the biggest struggles that you know, civilizations had you know, before the 1900s is communication. Because we couldn't, you know, just send out a tweet and say, hey, let's all meet in Times Square, New York at 5 p.m. on Saturday. We couldn't do that. You know, people were sending out flyers or, like, you know, messenger telegrams, and they got intercepted and, you know, they got burnt. And so it was really difficult to get a lot of people to, you know, in masses come together at one place, right? And I know that some of our forms of communication might also get, you know, being tapped, and like some messages might be, you know, getting lost. But from the amount of people that are now able to gather and communicate, we have incredible power and massive, like that we've never had before in history. Like, we have the ability to gather a whole country out into the streets. if the message is strong enough, you know? And so I absolutely believe in that power of us as a whole humanity being able to change legislation, like alone just by a vote. Like there's a certain amount of votes that you have to get for something in order for it to be acknowledged, you know, by a country or the United Nations. So I see huge amount of power of us really sitting down and thinking, hey, how can we restructure things? How can we, as like in our different countries or as an earth, get together and say, hey, this is our value system? You know, like the US have their you know, sorry, I'm not American. What is it called? The you know, the Constitution. Exactly, the Constitution, right? Like, wouldn't it be time now? You know, that was written so long ago, and you know, honor and love to people that sat down and did that. But wouldn't it be time for a new constitution, right? For constitution of the earth, right? Of today. Like, here is what we represent as humanity. Here are the values. And, you know, I'm a co-founder of a company called The Organism. And what we do is all deeply rooted in, you know, we don't believe in hierarchy, that one person sits at the top and then tells the other people what to do. We believe in a heterarchy where everyone sits in a different position and their own zones of genius and comes together in collaboration. And last week we sat down and it took a few sessions. The first one, every single person said what is their values, right? This is my values. And they had the time to speak and they wrote it all down and they're like, this is my value and this is why. And so each of us had, you know, maybe 15 to 20 like top values on our list of what we represented. And then in the next session, we all sat together and we chose from each other's values and saw what overlapped. And then we came together, these are our top values together as a community. And so we chose those values together. And like, how many like, you know, nations or countries or companies that you go and they put these values on the wall and they're like, these are our values, like follow them. But the people never chose those values. They never had a say in the values. And I think that every single person should be able to have a vote in that value system. And like, what do we as a humanity, you know, represent? Things like trust, connection, respect, resilience, responsibility, you know, these different value systems that we can uphold. And suddenly if we have a vote in that, let's not, you know, vote for the leaders, like let's vote in the values, like as a whole, as a community, and what do we represent? Suddenly you're going to see a whole shift in our entire culture because suddenly we were asked. And I think that's a big part of this whole movement that's happening is people want the choice. People want true freedom. They want to be able to have a say and a voice in their legislations, in who gets to be in charge and what money is going where, you know, like it's like we're not really being consorted, but we're being asked to pay these taxes and we're being asked to show up in certain ways. But what are we receiving in return? And a lot of the things that we're receiving in return are amazing, you know, not to like, you know, say anything to the people that have put so much hard work into creating these systems. But I think that we're in a time now, especially just circling in on something like education. And that's, you know, that's why I built I Trust University, is because I believe that we need a serious upgrade in the education system. And Adam, one of my co-founders, actually today had this amazing idea. And he said, you know, I just had this idea for a school where every 30 minutes, a different student from the space of inspiration is in charge to teach to the others.
Wow.
And they become, you know, there's a teacher that's like a facilitator and they're holding space, but every student, every 30 minutes, someone else is in charge. And the best way that you can learn is by teaching. And they'll become more and more curious about the subject because next time they teach, they want to really make it awesome, you know? So I was like, this is a great school, you know, this makes perfect sense.
No, incredible. Virginia, let me go back to something you said a minute ago, and you talked about the U.S. Constitution, which I, you know, every country, every government, every institution has their bylaws, their constitutions, their systems, and throughout the years, and as we grow, change, and evolve, constitutions have been amended, they have been changed, you know, for women's rights, for the right for women to vote, for gay marriages, for the legalization of marijuana. So those systems have been amended to a certain degree. However, the core basis of the constitutions in many institutions, including religious constitutions, the belief, the mission, the purpose has not changed. And I think that is what the problem is, okay? We cannot relate to a system that is 200 years old when you have a millennial, okay, with different beliefs, with different thoughts in a different culture, okay? I mean, we're in opposites. We can't meet halfway because our ideals are completely different. So you're exactly right. Those systems need to be updated to today's culture and today's economic climate, today's education climate, and the needs of every human being. When many of those constitutions or bylaws or mission statements for XYZ were created, they were created on the current culture of whatever that was 200-300 years ago. They're obsolete. They're obsolete. Our values are different. Our belief systems are different. Our needs are different as human beings. Our rights as human beings are completely different. So you're exactly right. You know, if anybody was to see you, Virginia, they would probably label you as a white privileged person. And I say that with a lot of respect, love and respect, because I know you, I follow you, I know your backstory. I know that that you grew up in somewhat of a dysfunctional household. You moved 45 different times. You lived in 45 different homes. You've been to tons of country. There's a story that I read about you one Christmas when your family was running out of money, and all you got was 2 gifts, and one of them was a gummy bears, and the other one was a Skywalker T-shirt for Christmas.
Yeah.
So, and I share that story not to embarrass you or anything like that, but I share that story for people to get a perspective of who you are. You know, when you have grown into your becoming, into your being. You were not born into it. So you had travel adversity, you had travel challenge, and you had travel difficulty. How is it that we can get people to understand why understanding what white privilege is so important?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting because I learned very young on how privileged I actually was, and you know, not so much the color of my skin, but the fact you know, that I was German, for example, right? That I had a passport and I could travel the world with that passport. And not there's many countries that don't have that privilege, and I grew up in one of them, which is the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean. And me and my sister were the only 2 white kids in the entire school. Like, we came to school, and you know, and this is the interesting thing as well, is like, maybe in another school, you know, the kids would have reacted differently, or, you know, if it, whatever, those are all like assumptions. But you know, I have the experience of being the only white girl in school and being treated like I was a princess. Like, all of my classmates, they treated me so well, with like so much love and like curiosity. Like, the first week we were like followed around like the whole schoolyard. And so, you know, and that was actually one of the most important like experiences of my life, because I integrated into that school. I learned to speak Spanish within 3 months. Like, I, you know, became a part of like the family and the tapestry. And so I went to my friends' homes and I realized, you know, what they had, like what, and I think this is also, this, you know, has maybe one of the things to do with that I'm white, but you can be white and also be from a low income family. You know what I mean? It doesn't really have to do with the color of my skin, but just generally, I would say the term of like being privileged to come to a home where I had a few pretty dresses. Like, I always thought, because I was poor compared to my other like rich white friends, you know what I mean? But then I went to that school and I was like, wow, like I'm living in this apartment in the beach. All my friends have houses with pools, but damn, am I lucky to have this apartment in the beach, And so it's all about perspective, really. It's like, where am I sitting? And you know what? Every single human being in this world is privileged compared to someone else. There's always going to be someone that you are more privileged to. And I'm going to say to the people now in America, like with your supermarkets and like everything that you have, go to third world countries like Haiti and Nicaragua and to just learn how privileged you really are, and that you are privileged to know where food is coming from. You know what I mean? Like there is always another layer of how privileged we really are. And it was something that I came to terms with, and I thought, wow, like this is the reality of life. Like this is like the true essence of being in survival. Because it's not like, oh, are people making fun of me? Are people calling me names? But my friends is, day-to-day thoughts is there going to be food on the table tomorrow? Right. And so it's like, there's more layers to that. And I mean, what that created in me was the desire to give back and to be of service and to show up. Right. And so with this privilege that we have over, anyone, being privileged also to play the piano, or to know some kind of skill that someone else doesn't know, or like this whole thing about people, their parents having the money to send them to some school or being able to have this degree. It's like, well, what do you do with that? What do you do with that privilege? And how do you really use it for good and use it to be of service, and being aware of it, and like, wow, I am so privileged that I was born in Germany, to a German father. I have a German passport. Like my mom is Russian, for example. She never gave up her passport. She can't come and visit me here in the UK because she will not give up her Russian passport, because for her, it's like a heritage thing, right? And even though she's been married to 2 German husbands, like she's not giving up the passport, right? And so I think it's really about realizing that as a human being, in whatever situation that you're in, is that we all have an amount of privilege that we've been given in life, even if it's just our own freedom or the privilege of choice, right, over other people, in other countries and other places around the world who are truly suffering, right? I mean, modern slavery is a thing. There's still 11 million slaves all over the world, and that's just a small estimate of people that are under terror and for like loss of their lives and their families, being forced to work in mines and in different types of things, child labor. Like we are privileged that we get to go to school, that we get to walk around free, that we get to know where our meal is coming from. So that's kind of like the lens that I look at it from, and us realizing that privilege and just really saying, how can I show up for humanity? How can I show up for the world? And putting that to use as soon as I've realized that. And I also realized that some people might, look at this whole racial debate that's going on, and the civil rights movement, and say, who's this white girl to talk to me about freedom? Who's this white girl to talk to me about love and connection, and the new paradigm, when she's sitting in her, in her mansion in the UK, and in total comfort, right? And then I would say to that is exactly that question is the root that is distracting us from actually stepping into love and stepping into connection and stepping into what is the next level of where we can go, instead of just getting distracted on you're privileged, I'm privileged, how much money do you have, how much money do I have, who has more followers, or all these other little things. That's just a conversation that just keeps on going into a circle. But how can we move about what's under that, and to share our stories? And how you were sharing about my life, and I appreciate that you share that. It brings me joy to think about that Christmas where I got the pack of gummy bears and the Star Wars shirt, because I love that Star Wars shirt. And there was that piece of me that saw all my other friends getting all these presents for Christmas, and like Barbie cars and all this other kind of stuff. And when it was happening to me at the time, and that's why I understand it, it felt like, oh man, like I don't really have as much as I would like to have. But then coming into gratitude and being like, oh wow, but like my parents really loved me and they really cared in that moment, that I at least had something. and like the something that I do have was like so well thought of, because my stepfather and we always watched the Wars movies together, you know. What could be more precious? I mean, I would love to have that Star Wars shirt now, and I would wear it all the time if I knew where in the world it got lost in some suitcase or a hurricane or what it was.
How do we bridge the gap between, and I'm going to go back just a slide, second. How do we bridge that gap between the white privilege or the privilege period and the Black Lives Matter? And I think it's important. I think it's important to clarify the fact that when Black Lives Matter movement talks about Black Lives Matter, they're not saying that only their lives matter. They are saying that they want to be noticed, that their lives are being minimized, brutalized, without regard. That's what the message is. Not that their lives matter equally or more than, but that they matter, period. That they want to be seen, that they want to be heard, that they want to be felt. So how do we bridge that gap into equality to where where we don't have this type of revolt again? Because it needs to end. This has been going on for many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. It would be great if we could solve that right now, Peter. Right? I think that.
But what can you and I do?
Yeah.
What can you and I do moving forward to not make this conversation uncomfortable? And I'm not saying that it is, because you're a very open-minded person. But I think the conversation is uncomfortable in many other rooms.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to equality, and when it comes to truly seeing our brothers and sisters as ourselves, right? No matter their income, origin, whatever it might be, that conversation always starts with ourselves first, right? So before I can see you, you know, as my equal brother in the perfection that you are, I need to see myself first as such. I need to see my own divinity, my own perfection, my own worthiness to have a voice in this world. And I think the reason why it triggers people when they hear Black Lives Matter is because they mean it to believe, well, then I don't matter if I'm not Black, you know? Because as you said, it's not about that. It's like all lives matter, absolutely. But this movement particularly wanted to have a voice and a place for people to come together and to just create more unity. And it doesn't mean segregation or separation. And I think that the misconception happens when we with ourselves haven't become fully met. And when we do fully meet ourselves in our own divinity, then we're going to be able to jump into the all lives matter paradigm. So I think that's really what needs to happen first. And so I would say to anyone listening right now, and when you are in these rooms, when you are feeling uncomfortable, or you're feeling it being uncomfortable from someone else, then really just ask them without saying, hey, I'm sensing some anger in you right now. I'm sensing some resentment in you right now. Just to set the context to them and say, hey, I would really love to have an honest, open, and vulnerable conversation about how this has been impacting us and how we've been impacted by, you know, segregation or inequality in our lives. Are you open to having that conversation? And then set the context and the container. And once you've have that agreement that the person is willing to have that discussion, then, you know, invite them and say, I would love you to tell me your story of what has been your experience, you know, on this topic in your life. You know, and kind of the way that we've just been doing, and, you know, sharing my story about, you know, being the only white girl with my sister in school and all this other kind of stuff. And then suddenly we can start painting a picture of our own experience landscape and our own emotional landscape of how we've with our own selves have experienced this in our lives. And then that's where we find the harmony, instead of us just projecting onto each other what you're supposed to think this, and you know, you're meant to be a lot more open-minded or liberal about, instead of putting our beliefs onto someone else, just allowing them the room to truly be witnessed and heard. in their experiences, and then, you know, sharing your own experiences, and you know, without interrupting, without trying to correct, without trying to coach them on what their opinion should be. And through that, and alchemization will be happening, and bringing it to, yeah, just a place of love and peace, and just truly being heard. And then like that, we can trickle out those conversations into more spaces.
Virginia, you have tremendous wisdom for your young age, and you're very eloquent. But you also had a lot of adversity. You know, you were a bully in school. You were sexually abused as a young child. You were abused about, you were called names about your weight. How do you get to a level of maturity and emotional growth and love and compassion for others as you have? What was your process of transformation? What was your trigger, and what got you here? Because I think that would be a wonderful lesson for all of us to be able to implement that, because you said it earlier, hurt people, okay? Heal people, okay? Yeah. So how do we heal so we can heal others?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. I think the first step on that whole process is acknowledgement, right? Having the awareness of, yes, I was sexually molested. You know, yes, I felt abused. You know, in a lot of my school life. You know, yes, there was trauma, and so the first thing is really having the awareness of that, and really looking at it, and then I would say, you know, the next part, when you have that awareness, is stepping into connection with another. Like the way I actually alchemized my sexual abuse as a teenager was through one of my best friends that I met at the time. I was like 15, 16 years old, and I finally felt like comfortable enough to share what had happened to me with another person, and to share my story. And when I did this, she started crying, and she felt the pain of what had happened to me. And I started crying because I allowed myself then to feel the pain of what had happened to me. And in that moment, that the pain that I was carrying for so many years, it melted away, because I was allowed to just be seen in my pain, and to be witnessed in my pain, and someone was able to hold me in that. And so what I would recommend to anyone in their process of transformation is to have the awareness of the pain that you're carrying throughout your life, because it is a heavy burden. We see all these little things, and we have this like almost like a little rucksack full of all our pain moments that we put everything in there, and we carry it on our back, and we say, this is all the bad stuff that's always happened to me, and this is why I'm a poor little thing, and this is why life is heavy for me, you know. And you're just carrying it all on your back, and instead of realizing that you don't actually have to carry any of those things, it's your choice to carry them. And the fact that they happen to you is just a beautiful part of your story. And I honor each of those experiences, including the sexual abuse, as something that I am grateful for in my life, that it's part of my story. Because guess what? Now I'm able to sit with other women that have experienced the same type of abuse and say, I feel it. I felt the pain. I know exactly where you are. And I honor that space, because it's crippling and it's degrading, and you feel ashamed, and you feel like it's your fault. But I can tell you that it's not. And I can tell you that you can let it go. And I can tell you that you can learn to love yourself again, and that it doesn't get to affect your story. And so that's why each and every one of those experiences that you've had, you know, those little notches on your belt, those are actually your gems. Those are your jewels. Those are the things that you get to turn into your greatest strength of making you who you are. And so once you've picked them up and you've shown them, and you've really allowed yourself, pick someone in your life, a friend or a family member who you truly trust and you know you can be safe with, then share that with them. And you know, moving on from that is really about seeking community as much as possible. You know, there's this quote that I love that goes, before you diagnose yourself as depressed, make sure you're not surrounded by assholes. And right.
Oh, sure. There's your diagnosis right there.
Exactly. And so it's like a lot of us right now are surrounded by people that don't believe in us, that are in their own fear, and that are saying your ideas are too big, and that's never going to happen. And how can someone like you get there anyways? And I had a director of Hollywood when I was 15 years old say to me, Virginia, if you were skinny, I would take you straight with me to Hollywood. Right. So I was working on a movie in the Dominican Republic for 2 months. I was the main actress' stand-in, and she actually didn't want me to be hired because my thighs were too fat for her. Even though, I mean, back then I had a perfectly healthy, beautiful, skinny body. And yet, in that industry, it was so discriminated against that you had to be, this like tiny little stick. And so that's going to happen to you in life. People are going to say that to you. And this is where I would recommend one of my favorite authors, Don Miguel Ruiz. He wrote the book, The Four Agreements and The Mastery of Love, which are two of my favorite books in the whole world. And, if you're experiencing anything of what we're just talking about, I would say start there, read these books. And we have the Four Agreements actually in the wall of our kitchen, because we as a company, we believe in them so much. And one of them is don't take anything personally. Right. So these people, these projections, like, even also the molestation, it had nothing to do with me. I was just a mirror of that, of their own sadness, of their own, feeling like they don't belong. And so often we become, the sort of victim to that. Right. But actually, it doesn't really have much to do with us. And I know it's such a difficult thing to hear when you're in that pain, because it's so real to you. And sometimes that pain is what we feel like is giving us meaning or belonging. Like we feel like we are important because we've experienced this pain. And, it's funny because there's sometimes I'm sitting in meetings, with friends and people who are sharing their stories and their pain that's happened. And I'm like, no, I wish I would have experienced more pain in my life. I mean, compared to them, I have nothing, it's like you're almost kind of, trying to one up each other, like, oh, I'm almost got shot. Oh, just trying to like, but actually, to each and every one of us, whatever the pain experience is, it's just as real. Like we can't compare, because in that moment, it was crippling and frightening and painful and shattering, where we thought, how can we even rebuild ourselves as a human being? But that's how resilient we are. And that should even make you just more amazed at how you're standing here today, because, are you alive? Yes. Do you have all your limbs? Maybe if you've lost a few, okay, great. Can you still, function? Amazing, and so, being resilient through that darkness. And actually what you'll realize, and this is the thing with, and I love using, going to the gym or sports and working out as a metaphor for that, because actually what you're doing when you're working out your muscles is you're tearing them. You are actually kind of breaking yourself apart to rebuild yourself. And I truly believe that with emotional resilience, and the deeper that we can go into our trauma and to our pain, and to be witnessed when we are not feeling great, when we are in anger, when we are feeling helpless, and to be witnessed in that space, and to break through at the other end of that is going to be the most strongest, resilient, amazing, powerhouse, wealthiest you that you've ever been. And so, observe that for yourself a little bit, play with it, and look at moments in your life where you have been resilient and you've gone through pain, and what you've come out with on the other end.
Beautifully said. I to expand a little bit more on what you said is that I truly believe that at some point we don't live in our stories. We share our stories in service, and we become whole. We become part of the world. And if we continue to live in our stories, and we're not doing anybody any service. So how do we transcend? How do we help people heal? It's once we are healed. If you go through a process of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, you can either become the perpetrator, the victim, the participant, the survivor, or the advocate. Okay. And
Mm,
I think it is time for all of us to be advocates for the cause of humanity, to be advocates for the cause of what is right and what is rightful for everyone, not just for the few and the privileged. And I think that the universe has given us this opportunity to collectively use our platforms, your platform, my platform, to have this type of dialogues that are going to awaken others into becoming participants of our message. But in our message, they can find their own.
beautifully said. Yeah.
Virginia, tell us about Human We Trust. What are you doing with that today? And how are your businesses being impacted by COVID-19? We know that there's a new norm. Although I think the reality is that we create a new norm every day that we wake up. That's in my reality. I choose to believe that, okay? So tell us, how are your companies moving forward, and what advice you give to those young millennial entrepreneurs that so much follow you and use you as a resource of growth and expansion?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love curveballs, because they just allow us to see things from a different perspective. And I was probably in like the best environment I could possibly be when, all this news started spreading through the world about COVID, because I was in a cruise in the Caribbean, and we just boarded like when all this news came out, and I decided to like completely be off my phone the entire time, no communication with the outside world for 10 days. And my friend that I was there with, she would use her phone sometimes, and she'd be getting this news about COVID and all this stuff, and people were so worried that we were on this cruise. But I was on an Abraham Hicks cruise, one of my favorite spiritual teachers. And so everyone who was there, who's like a manifester and like, using the law of attraction, and everyone was just like in this like bubble of joy and excitement. And Abraham was talking about like, I can't wait to get back to the office. I can't wait to sit down with my team. All of the events for this whole year have been canceled. And it's funny because Humans I Trust and the profit, my revenue stream that I was living off of, like for the past year before COVID, was from doing, mastermind events for entrepreneurs. And we had all these events set up, and we were going to do all these different things, and everything was canceled. And so I went from having a really amazing income stream to suddenly completely zero, like from of what I was expecting. And so I was like, oh wow, like that's a new kind of situation that's coming in. But I just so fully trusted the universe, and just fully trusted that whatever's going to come is going to come. And so the first thing that I started working on is actually our online university, because I never felt that like we were working on the university, we were working on the curriculum and getting everything set up, but I never felt like it was the spark to launch it yet, right? And so I was like, oh, amazing, like now we need more online education than ever, and people are moving. And so I started bringing together our professors and started working on the university again, and I got really honest with myself, because I looked at it and I said, what do I really want to do with this university? Like, what impact do I want to make? And I realized we didn't have any of the funding that we actually needed to get people like 𝗔𝗩𝗔𝗕𝗏 on board, to get people like, Prince EA, like, amazing thought leaders and influencers that would actually be able to share the voice of education, of like what we're doing, right? And I was looking at it, and it was such a big impact that I wanted to have, and I wanted to create this documentary. I'm calling it We Trust Humanity. So it's a collective of thought leaders coming together, and at the end they're going to say, I trust humanity will, clean the water systems. Like, I trust humanity will create unity, like, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the last scene, everyone together is going to say, we trust humanity. And so like, that's the documentary. So there was like all these visions like for this university. And I was just like, it actually does need funding in order to make it at the level that I want to make it, right? If we look at a Mind Valley or a masterclass or any of these other like current leaders in the space, and me with my grassroots, like, Hogwarts for entrepreneurs, like learning, I was like, this actually wants to be a lot bigger. And while I was in that contemplation, suddenly from the Humans I Trust community, I get, phone calls and asked to come in to these, multi-billion-dollar deals and help the governments get their PPE, their medical supplies. And one of the things that I'm known for is trust, right? So the companies call it Trust You. Everything that we do is representing trust and human connection, and getting leaders into more trust with themselves and with each other. And what was happening globally is actually that this whole space of getting medical supplies is the most scam, fraudulent, like untrusted space I've ever seen. Like I was just amazed at the yeah, the low level of integrity that was happening in these spaces. And so I, again, kind of like rose to the front lines, because that's my thing. Like that's my zone of genius. Like when shit's burning, like I turn on. Like that's when I like rise up and I'm like, let's go. Like it's where I'm most focused, because it's how I operate, And so I got asked to come into these conversations, these dialogues with global leaders. And to give you an example, the Canadian government has submitted over 2,000 LOIs, letters of interest, letters of intent, to purchase these PPE, personal protective equipment, and are in like multiple legal battles because of fraudulent activity, because of people lying, of saying that they have supplies when they don't have supplies being counterfeit. And like, these are lives on the line. These are doctors dying because they're having to put plastic bags around their heads in order to help people and to not get infected. So I was just, stepped into it. And from coming in as a mediator, that's when Human Trust Logistics, which is the PPE business that we are working in and bringing medical supplies to the front lines, was born. And it's also interesting because I've been, one of our big missions with 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗘 is to build $1 billion fund for all these amazing conscious entrepreneurs and businesses. Because while we do have a lot of like leaders in the space, like people who are, running their own funds and, are investors with $100 million funds and things like that, there's also a lot of new entrepreneurs in our space. Like one of our members, for example, is creating conscious porn, right? Which is a little bit controversial, but it's actually very, very important because it's a huge industry and someone needs to tackle that dialogue around what's going on there with the disconnection, right? And so there's a lot of these different things and a lot of different industries that are, like on the cutting edge and that are emerging. And we have all these entrepreneurs, and what they need is funding, what they need is support, what they need is teams, and like, and an accelerator as well to help them go into coherence and actually build the companies. So that's kind of what's coming into the space now. We are building this $1 billion fund for 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗘, and it's being funded by, the business that we're running ourselves, which is, helping with these medical supplies, right? Because we are setting up, production lines for an entire year. So it's not like one order of like, let's get these, masks to where they are, but like, let's make sure they have them for the next 1 to 2 years, because there will be other spikes coming. And so this is actually the job that I used to do for Apple. So I was working for Apple, managing $1 billion for them annually. And as I was iPhone distribution sales manager. So it was so funny because I was like, well, that skill set, I'm never going to really need that again. And that's exactly the business that we're doing right now. And so it's something that I absolutely love, and the connections and the network that we're working with, and really looking at a bigger picture of not only how can we, get these supplies to the front lines, but how can we use biodegradable, like how can we create biodegradable masks, for example? Because one of the biggest problems that people don't understand right now is that it can actually be very harmful to human health to be wearing these masks. Like, for example, the 3-ply, like the blue like surgeon mask that people are wearing. Do you know on average how long the average American wears one of those blue masks?
No idea.
Take a guess.
10 days?
11 days.
Wow.
Yeah. So 11 days they're wearing these masks.
Well,
And after, I mean,
yeah.
yeah. And so alone already from the fact that, they're going to get infected, but it gets worse than that, because after 4 days, the paint that is in that mask, the coloring starts to disintegrate and go into your lungs, and it's actually poisoning you. And so we are effectively now wearing these masks way too long, and we are also poisoning our lungs with that. And what's going to happen is that, and scientists are like now looking into this because we need to come up with alternative solutions, is that instead of 250,000 people dying of COVID, suddenly you're looking at 1 million people because of how our immune systems have been weakened through that. And so those are the sort of big picture problems that we're looking into. We're also working with a company right now that has developed a spray that is 99.9% effective against killing COVID. So you can literally spray it around your nose, around your mouth. You can put it on animals, you can put it on kids. It's 100% natural. There's no chemicals, nothing in it. And so instead of civilians walking around with masks, which isn't actually the best thing for them to do right now, they can put the spray, they just put it there on their nose and around their face, and they're protected for 2 hours.
Wow.
So yeah, and so that's the kind of stuff that we're working on. And the other thing is also, my biggest thing is human connection, and our I Trust You shirts. Anyone you see wearing an I Trust You shirt, you can hug them. And now with COVID, it's like, like you can't really do that. And so it's like, how do we get people to connect? How do we get strangers to connect again in this time, through maybe, like a faraway high five, or, mimicking each other's dance moves or whatever. There's like fun, playful things that we can do. So that's been at the center of my exploration right now, and has my full focus in this time of the crisis. But, you've inspired me through this conversation. I feel like we should start a petition for a new constitution, like an Earth constitution, to be created, and give people the ability to actually add something to this constitution of what they think should be a human right. So I think there's some stuff in the works there.
Come in. I'll support you in any way that I can. Trust is a big factor for you. Why and when was that born?
Yeah, it's interesting because it was given to me, so I don't know where everyone is at their level of spirituality. But when I was about 12 years old, I read this book by Dr. 𝗟𝗏𝗧 called Many Lives, Many Masters, where his patients during sessions with him as a psychologist would recount different lifetimes and past lives that they would have. And, one of his patients recounted up to 84 different lives. So I've always been a very spiritual person, and I do believe in energy and source and the universe and guidance and ideas that are greater than myself. And I trust you. I really don't know how I could have had this idea. I don't think it's something that came from me. I think it was something that was given to me. And I was in New York, and I got this download where it was like, build this company, I trust you, make this shirt where anyone you see wearing it, you can hug someone, human connection, boom, like that's the download that I received. And in that moment when that came, I must say, I didn't really understand my relationship with trust. And it was something that I had to learn over the last few years in truly understanding what does trust mean, and how it's the fertile ground of any relationship, right? May it be in business, may it be romantic or whatever. And for me now, trust has become even a deeper meaning than just the trust that I have for you, and the trust that I feel through others around me. But it's trusting the universe, like fully trusting that everything that is happening in every single moment is in service for us. Like I love how Tony Robbins says, life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. And it's that change of lens of perspective of when you run to your bus and you miss it. Or like I had a situation the other day when like I stepped on my glasses and they completely broke. I can't like use them anymore. And I had actually, it was perfect because I had another pair of glasses that was coming from my friend that sent them to me in the US. And then when the postman arrived, they said, hey, we have a package for Larry. And there's no Larry here, but it was actually Larry who sent it. And then so they sent it back to the post. And then I tried to call them, tried to get it redelivered and all this stuff. And finally Larry messages me and he's like, oh my God, I just called the post. I finally got through. And they said, if you don't pick it up today, it's going to be gone. So I get in the car and I go there and the post office was just closing and they didn't like have the package. And then I ran to another place and they were like, oh, like that mail like left back to the States like an hour ago. So I missed it, you know, and in those moments, that must be frustrating. You know, that's kind of like annoying because you're like, oh, like, why is this happening? Like, what thoughts can the universe possibly have for taking my glasses away from me, you know, for in so many ways. And it could easily make you feel like a little bit of a victim. Like, oh man, why is nothing going wrong for me? Like, I drove to the post office. I went everywhere. Like, why did I miss it? And then a few days later, a friend of mine, I told him about the glasses and he says to me, he's like, oh, my friend actually owns this amazing like designer like glasses company. They're like $700 like the frame or something. And like, you know, you wear glasses yourself. It's a very particular thing to find
Sure.
like the right pair of glasses. Like it's a big deal. And he was just like, oh, I'll talk to him and I'm sure he'll give you like a new pair of glasses for free. And I was like, oh my God, like that's awesome. You know, like it's just like, it comes back around in like a different way. And I looked at this website and I'm like, these are the coolest glasses I've ever seen. Like, you know, like, and so it's just, sometimes life has a funny way of upgrading you in something. And in that moment, it feels like, you know, you're being done wrong and, you know, poor little me. And you look at it from a different perspective and suddenly you're like, oh, well, that was the thought and idea. And sometimes the new pair of glasses or the solution doesn't come until maybe a year or 2 years. But when it does come, it's incredible. And so instead of feeling all that frustration, like while this was happening, like when I got there and they just told me that the mail had left, I was like, oh wow, like, because it's a very clear sign from the universe. Like when something is, when there's no possibility for you to change that, it's a very clear sign that that's what's meant to be. And I was in full trust, right? And so that's where the relationship to trust comes in. Trusting every moment that you're exactly where you need to be. You know, you're exactly as successful as you need to be. You're as, you know, as amazing as you need to be for everything to unfold the way that it needs to.
Wow, you're a powerful, powerful, powerful woman. Where can people find you on social media?
So my full name at Virginia Salas-Kastilio. And yeah, I would say Instagram is probably the best. Like that's where I've been focusing. Yeah, my time, my stories. If you want to get to know me, if you want to get to know my soul, then that's definitely a place to go. And there are some videos on YouTube as well under my old username 𝗔𝗩𝗔𝗕𝗦𝗪 or @ITrustYouMovement. On YouTube, you'll find videos about our mastermind and Envision Festival that we just did and like all the fun things. And we actually have a documentary as well, the I Trust You documentary. So where I literally filmed from the first day, you know, 4 years ago when I started it, like I have a video of myself where I'm like, this is the birth of the I Trust You movement. So it's really cool.
Virginia, it's been a really, really, really pleasure having you on. You're an amazing, incredible human being. Virginia Salas-Kastilio, a human I trust. And I look forward to getting better. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.
Thank you so much. So much love.
Thanks for joining us today on another episode of the Coming Clean podcast. Make sure to join Peter and his next guest on a brand new episode as we continue changing and impacting lives across the world. Share this episode with a friend, follow, subscribe, and leave a review.
Boy, I had to get it fast. Hit a dash in my position, you would never last. Real talk, I had to get it fast.